Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay, so today, since I wanted to discuss about ecological modeling, so I then decided to go for some basics of ecology, which will be helpful for the beginners. And then I'll discuss about some of our models that we developed on ecological modeling. Basically, we did the effect of pollutants on biological species. So those models we'll discuss in the second phase. First, I'll go for some ecological definitions and principles. Rata, is it changing?
Yes, sir. It is changing.
Okay. So at the outset, say the ecology is defined as the study of relationships between organisms and their environment. Very, very simple definition. It is the relation between organisms and their environment. So in research problem also, we consider different types of environments, different types of factors affecting the biological species. So we'll discuss those things. And when we say environment, it can be consisting of biotic as well as non-abiotic, which are living and non-living. So that includes both biotic and abiotic factors that affect an organism. And as the definition goes, here you can see in this slide, those marked with blue color are abiotic, and those marked with red color, these are biotic, like insects, plants, microorganisms, reptiles, mammals, birds, and other sunlight, oxygen, carbon dioxide, these are abiotic. Here's definition of species is a group of organisms that are genetically related but reproductively isolated from other groups of organisms in nature. And that method of isolation could be time, habitat, spatial, reproductive. So here, example in the background, which all other groups are similar, except that up to genus, they are same. One gray wolf is there and another species there. So they have difference in species. When we distinguish the species, they are different species, but they belong to the same domain, kingdom, phylum, and so on. And other ecological terminologies. So what is environment? As you say, anything biotic and abiotic that affects the organism in any way. Okay, so population is all individuals of a given species within a defined area. So for a population, we have to define an area. then the number of individuals will constitute the population. And communal is all population of a defined group in a given place at a given time. Note this, it is for a given place, for a community to define a place and for a given time. And all populations, okay, so that will form all population of a given place at a given time will form the community. Okay, here is a diagram further clarifying the definitions. So population, you can see, is of the number of individuals of the same species, the upper one. And the community below, you can see you have different species, consist of different species in a particular place. And then ecosystem, so it consists of all the things that we discussed. So any unit that includes all of the organisms in a given area interacting with the physical environment, so that flow of energy leads to a clearly defined trophic structure, biotic diversity, and material cycles within the system. So it consists of all these energy circuits, food chains, diversity patterns, nutrient cycles, development and evolution, control. So you can see now this is third one, which is ecosystem. It is the same diagram that for community, but then in addition we have now all this source of energy, then oxygen, carbon dioxide. So all including it forms the ecosystem. And now another important factor, which is important from the point of view of research as well. Many research have been done for this factor called competition, which really affect the biological species living in a certain area. So what is competition? The simultaneous demand by two or more organisms for limited environmental resources, such as nutrients, living space, or light. Okay, so when there is simultaneous demand for these resources, then competition takes place. Okay, and it happens everywhere. Like for human beings also compete for various reasons. Likewise, all living organisms, even plants, they compete. So some papers we will discuss at a later stage in the second phase, where we will show competition among plants. It's called allopathic effect. So we'll see that. Now there are two types of competition. Okay, one is intra-specific. You can see intra. Okay, intra is what? Simultaneous demand between members of the same species. Whenever it is competition among members of the same species, it will be intra-specific competition. And of course, when it is competition between or demand for resources between different species, members of different species, it will become inter-specific competition. So you can see a bear and wolf, they're fighting over a deer. Then law of tolerance. If any factor exceeds the minimum or maximum tolerance of the organism or population, it will fail to thrive. So there will be some examples. So there are different zones, like zone of physical stress, physiological stress. So here in this zone, organisms infrequent, means there will be less number of organisms living in such stressful zone. Then another is zone of intolerance. So in the zone of intolerance, no organisms will survive. So there will be no organisms will be present there. So here's a schematic diagram and explaining further this point, law of tolerance. So you can see with the red arrow, you can see it is zone of intolerance, and it is distribution of these species over different temperature zones. So when the temperature is very low, that is zone of intolerance, you can see there will be no species here present. Similarly, when it is very high, then also it is zone of intolerance and there will be no members of the species present. And there is zone of physiological stress. You can see on both sides with green arrow. So there will be some physiological stress. I mean, it's not comfortable temperature here. So some will be maybe present there. Okay. And then in between, you can see optimum range is there, temperature range. In that case, most of the members of the species will be present. Okay. So this is what is law of tolerance. Okay. Then habitat, as you know, the place where an organism is suited to live. Okay. In a sense, it is address of the species. So in an example of a tortoise, there is sandy, well-drained soil. So they prefer this type of places because of, they can make holes easily when it is sandy. Okay. Another example. Then ecological niche. This is another important concept. The functional role an organism plays in an ecosystem. So you can see two examples are here. Ecological niche. First one is at night. Second one is day. So you can see the both share the same habitat, okay, and the same food source, but each has their own ecological needs due to different hunting behavior. So they probably adapt to this functional role to avoid competition. Okay. So niche is the range of physical or biological conditions in which a species lives and the way the species obtains what it needs to survive. So you can see here that every species has its own range of tolerance for the ability to survive and reproduce under a certain set of environmental conditions. You can see to avoid competition, they have adapted different methods and so that there will be no competition. Here is a cartoon who's explained the same thing. So the one marten inviting the other, but what they say is that they don't want to share the same habitat just to avoid the competition. And here is a very important concept of competitive exclusion principle by G.F. Gauss. Gauss was a Russian biologist and evolutionist, and he proposed this principle called Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. So this principle says two species competing for the same resource cannot coexist if all other ecological factors remain constant. Okay. So the principle says two species competing for the same resource cannot coexist. So what will happen? That one species must eventually die out. Okay. Or what may happen? For species to coexist in nature, they must adapt ecological differences. Okay. So, and third possibility is competition forces species to adapt or fade away, even extinction. So these are the choices. This is harsh reality, but this is the fact that two species they cannot coexist if they share the same resource. Okay, so either they have to win in the competition or adapt or die. Here is another example, or the proof actually, this is experimental. It's two laboratory population of paramecium. Here, you can see the first one, the first graph shows one paramecium, which is kept on its own, and it grows very nicely, you can see. Okay. On the vertical axis, it is population density. So population density, you can see it continuously increases. Those who are with mathematics background will understand this very easily. Here is a graph. Initially, it increases, the population increases very rapidly, which is concave upward, you can see. And then after a certain level, it will be in higher level, but the rate of growth will decrease. Okay, it will be concave down. So it's like that. And another paramecium is which is also separately grown. You can see this also increases. But if these two are mixed up and grown together, then there will be a different picture, and that will be the effect of competition between the two. You can see first one remains almost the same, but the second one, after some point of time, it starts decreasing gradually. And there is a point of inflection one can see. Again, point of inflection, people with mathematics background will easily understand. It's the point where the concavity changes. Okay. So after that point, the second species going down. That means it will be vanished or die out. Okay. So this is the effect of competition between the two. There is something called Darwin's finches. Again, this is initially, if you see the picture, they look almost the same. But if you look them carefully, you see that they have adapted in their beaks. You can see different sizes and shapes. Okay, to avoid competition. Here the is classified here. You can see on the left hand side it is tree finches, warbler finch, okay, and ground finches. And you can see in this category they have adapted in such a way that one will have fruit eaters, then insect eaters, and so on, cactus eaters, and so on. Okay, so this change is for coexistence, but they adapted to avoid competition. Okay, here, again, this is adaptation to avoid competition. So they survive the same habitat, but they live in different heights. Okay. Then another example of competitive exclusion is Kaju indigenous. Kaju is a common name for some plant species, and these are such that they grow very fast in any kind of land. They can grow, and they will capture the whole land, and they will not allow it will be completely covered, and it will be very difficult for other species to survive to get sunlight. So initially, it was, as you can see, it was recommended by soil conservation. The purpose was good. It was they brought it from Japan, and they planted for soil conservation. But finally, it was found to be very aggressive. It grows very aggressively, and it is now recognized as detrimental to forestry and wildlife. Okay, so here is another example. And then succession. Succession is nothing but stages of plant development. So you can see there are different stages here. Pioneer species to climax, which is final stage. Okay, so there can be different, two types of succession. One is primary succession. The other will be secondary. Primary usually takes a long time, hundreds or thousands of years it may take. And secondary is whenever there is some environmental change, like if there is a fire. Okay, so after that, how the plants regrow. Okay, that will be relatively faster than primary succession. You can see here the replacement of one community of organisms, plant and animal, by another in an orderly and predictable manner, usually following a disturbance. So that disturbance could be like any natural calamity, fire, etc. So the disturbance is defined here. Disturbances are relatively discrete events in time that disrupt the ecosystem, community, or population structure and change resources, subject availability, or the physical environment. It is often a necessity in some communities. Examples are like fire, hurricanes, insect outbreak, volcanoes, floods, wind, drought, etc. So these are the disturbances for the plant species. So here is defined the entire sequence of communities, a tract of land transition graph over time. So you can see that in this sequence, from grass to shrub to pines and then hardwoods. Okay, so early stage is called pioneer or early succession of species, then it goes to climax. So each transitory community within a sphere is called a spheral stage. Okay, and as mentioned earlier, primary succession. So what is that? Colonization of areas with organisms that did not have life. So this primary, as I said, it could take hundreds or thousands of even millions of years. It starts from nothing. There may not be any life, but slowly, like from the rocky area, slowly some shrubs are coming, then developing into trees and so on. So, but this process is very slow. I mean, it takes time. And begins with bare rock exposed by geological activities or mining. the primary succession. Here is a diagram representing primary succession. You can see initially there's bare rock, some lichens. So in this process, though it is in the same slide, but it takes hundreds and thousands of years. So you can see in the third column here. So initially it was all rocky, then some soil started accumulating here, and then after a long period of time, it may become like this. Okay, it reaches from pioneer stage with intermediate stage and then climax. Okay, final stage. And secondary succession is like this. Suppose because of some wildfire or something, it is burnt out, then this after some time it will regrow and it will become like this. So regeneration of areas where previous community existed, but a disturbance set succession back to an earlier serial stage. Okay. And it is much faster than primary succession due to the presence of soil. Since soil is already there, that's why it is faster. But in primary succession, there was no soil. So it starts accumulating and it takes long time to go to the climax stage. So here again another. This also represents the seed ball, and then biome. So biome is a large terrestrial community defined by its climate and unique assemblage of plants and animals, determined by available moisture and temperature. So here is a representation of biomes. You can see here grassland, desert like this, and increasing dryness, here increasing temperature. Okay, so that means this tundra is with the least temperature. All right. And this is distribution of all biomes. You can see polar regions will be tundra, of course, kind of blue color. And tropical rainforests are kind of nearer to the equator. Here is another very interesting representation. So here, any area will fall under one of these categories. Here you can see on the horizontal axis, it is the temperature. On the right, temperature is decreasing, and then annual precipitation on the vertical axis. So, for example, in tropical rainforest, there will be annual precipitation will be very high. Okay, and the temperature will be quite high as well. Okay, and then tundra, you can see temperature is very less and precipitation is also less, so it's not feasible for organisms. And then another diagram representing the latitude, elevation, and biome distribution. Okay, so you can see in the upper hemisphere, from North Pole to the equator, we have tundra, taiga, temperate forest, tropical rainforest. Okay, and at various elevations, you can see sea level, and then we can have like this. distribution of various biomes. Here again, by altitude, it is distributed. And this is a particular area, southern Arizona, and distribution of various species due to difference in altitude. Okay, as we have already seen, taiga, temperate zone, tropical rainforest, tundra, grassland, desert, these are different biomes. And further for tundra, it has usually lots of oil and coal reserves from North America. And then northern coniferous forest. There's taiga, lots of timber harvest and mineral extraction takes place in this region. And biomes, temperate forest, the eastern United States. And tropical rainforest. And of course, as we have seen in that diagram earlier, tropical rainforest will receive very high amount of rain, and it will be relatively hot also. Okay, and now this is warm climate grasslands, scattered treat, and grassland with no trees in central North America. And this is desert, very regions, usually in rain shadow. There will be very less amount of rain. Okay, so I think as I mentioned, in this second phase, I'll discuss some of the models that we developed, and as I mentioned, it will be like effect of pollutants, environmental pollutants on the biological species. So we'll see some of the models. Before that, what is a mathematical model? It is defined here. It is a simplified representation of certain aspects of a real system. So suppose we have a real system, means real life problem, and that problem we want to represent mathematically using mathematical tools and equations. In our case, we use, of course, differential equations. So why it is simplified representation? Because if you consider every aspect of the real system and put it into your model, the model will become too complex to handle it and come to any meaningful conclusion. And that is why it is always simplified representation. So that means there will be some simplifying assumption in each model. There will be some assumptions, simplifying assumptions. Now, at this stage, the modelers, the people who develop models, sometimes they make the model so simple, it becomes oversimplified. Okay, sometimes it becomes unrealistic simplification. Okay, so you may not get a good result or may not be able to validate. So you have to go back and rectify your assumptions. Okay, so this is a very important step. Okay, and then capturing the essence of that system. Okay, why capturing the essence? You know, significant components of the real system must be captured. Okay, so it has to be a balanced model, not too complex. We should not make it too complex by incorporating all possible factors. And at the same time, we should capture the significant factors affecting the real system. Okay. So in a way, this could be the definition of a model. It should be like this. Then mathematical model, of course, when you incorporate mathematics into it, you represent mathematically. So it's called a mathematical model. So what is a mathematical model? In this schematic diagram, it is mentioned here. A mathematical model is an abstract model that uses mathematical language to describe behavior of a system. So in this diagram, if you see on the left-hand side, you have P, which is the problem or real world problem. And then mathematical modeling you apply. And the whole process is represented by this middle circle. And then after this, you have a mathematical model now. From real world problem, you apply the modeling process, okay, and then you get a mathematical model. So in this represents the mathematical modeling cycle, and you can see number one, step one is what? Specify the problem that you have to specify first. Then set up a metaphor. Means it is like you have to like think about various parameters and variables. Okay, then formulate the mathematical model and solve the mathematical problem, and then interpret the solution in terms of the real problem. Okay, then compare with reality. This step 6 is so important. This also one can call the validation. Compare with reality means like when you analyze, then you compare with the real life, I mean, observed facts from the problem, observed facts. So the model has to agree with the observed facts. Okay, so that is what is validation step. Okay. So, and then after validation, if you can successfully validate the model, then you can apply this model to interpret the results and even to predict. This is the beauty of mathematical modeling, that when you compare with other type of studies like survey work and other type of studies and mathematical modeling, so the basic difference will be mathematical models, when they are successfully developed, they will be able to predict the future behavior of the system. So this is the beauty and strength of mathematical modeling. So after it is validated, then you can conclude, you can predict, as it says here. You can use the model to know the properties and future behavior of the real system. Okay. So the step one that was in the diagram, step one, specify the problem. It is further mentioned here what that step means, specifying the problem. So what we have to do is to know what is the background of the problem, its history and its causes. What do we want to know? Why is one interested in solving the problem? What are the limitations of the current practice? What is the solution needed for? What is the purpose of the problem? What are the constraints to solving the problem? And then what is the solution? So these are some of the questions one should consider. Okay. What is the impact, benefit of solving the problem? What problem is solved if one has found an answer? How will the outcome be charged? What form does the solution need to have? What do you communicate to the problem owner? How would you implement the solution? Are there other related problems? And then the step two, which I mentioned earlier, the setup in metaphor. Okay. What are the operative processes at work? What needs to be determined for solving the problem? What are the main features which ones are relevant and which ones are not? As I said, in developing the model, you have to think about all this so that you can consider the significant features. You can capture the significant features of the real problem and avoid less significant ones, because you need to have a balance. As I said, it should not be very complex, and at the same time, it should be representative of the real problem. And what is the relation between the main features? Okay. What is the relation between the main features? Which features do change? What is controllable in the problem? What are the conditions? What are the relevant time scales and time dimensions? What kind of material is considered? The characteristics, and so on. Okay. So to formulate a mathematical model, so what we need to do is translate relationships of metaphor. In the metaphor stage, whatever we decided, those have to be translated into mathematical terms. Okay. So you must have input, output, constants, okay, state variable, independent variable, all this we have to find out. So this is this third step. Okay, and the fourth step is to solve it analytically, numerically, and whatever way possible, whatever tools you have, you apply and find the solution of the mathematical problem. And then from the solution, you interpret the results in terms of the real problem. Okay. So you have to go back to the real world problem. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this step of comparison with reality, it's actually validation. Okay, validation of model, extraction of model parameters, extension to other operating regimes, and model insufficient for solving problem. See, if it is insufficient, that means that the model that you have developed, the results obtained from the model does not match with the observed facts. In that case, it will mean the model is insufficient for solving problem. So you have to re-enter modeling cycle again. Now, where to re-enter? You see this arrow. It goes back to set up a metaphor. Here, you have to decide. You have to think which are what went wrong in this step of the assumptions, basically assumptions here. Whatever simplifying assumptions you might have taken, those assumptions you have to rethink and reset, and then start all over again. Okay. So if it is successfully validated, what you have to do is to use this for interpretation. Here, now you can determine, suppose it is validated successfully, then you have to determine typical behavior, critical parameters, trends, dependency on control parameters, recommendations, whatever you have, or whatever you can conclude, recommend, you can use the model because it is validated now. So this is the process, mathematical modeling process that is mentioned here. So what are the uses? So mathematical models are used almost in all fields such as natural sciences, engineering disciplines, physics, biology, electrical engineering, economics, sociology, political science, etc. So modeling being used in almost all possible areas. And here some papers that some models that we develop, and it is published in Ecological Modeling. The title is A Model for Allopathic Effect on Two Competing Species. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning, that this is about competing species, but as I see, like human beings compete, all organisms they compete. Whoever share the same resources, definitely they are bound to compete. So here some plants also they compete. Of course, they compete for not for money, but they compete for the resources like sunlight, like groundwater, and like that. So this is called allopathic effect. So in this effect, one species to get competitive advantage, it may secrete some toxicant, okay, through the pores on the leaves, and then it will diffuse to the surrounding area through like abiotic factors like wind, rain, and so on, and it will be spreading in the surrounding area surrounding that plant, but it is secreted by this plant, so it will not affect itself, but it will affect all other surrounding plants. Okay, so that's how it will win in this competition, and then no other plant can share its nutrients in the surrounding that plant. So this process is modeled in this paper. So you can see in this paper a mathematical model is proposed and analyzed to study the coexistence of two competing plant species in a finite habitat by assuming that each species produces a toxic substance affecting the other species. Okay, so it is shown that the usual existence criteria between two competing species in the absence of toxicant may be changed if each species produces in a large amount affecting the other. So here is the mathematical model. You can see this will be very not difficult to understand. You can see there are two species. In this case, of course, they are plants. So N1, N2 are different biomass. And then first equation, what does it say? It has N1 and R1, N2 is growth rate of N1. R1 means growth rate of N1. But that growth rate, of course, depends on N2 because N2 is secreting some toxicant which will affect N1. So its growth will depend on N2. So R1 will be a function of N2. Okay. And then minus R0, R10, okay, and N1 square by K1 N2. So you see here, what are all these? Now for beginners, I'm telling that, this factor will be for, it's called crowding effect. Okay, whenever N has a large value, in that case, there will be intra-specific competition. So that is here. So this is a logistic type of growth model equation. So, and K1 is the carrying capacity of this species N1. And of course, the carrying capacity also will depend on N2. Okay, because the interaction is such that its growth depends on N2. Okay, so these are the N1 and N2 are those species, and then T1 and T2 are the toxicants produced by N1 and N2 respectively. So see, when T2 is produced by N2, that's why there is a negative term. Because of T2, there is a negative term here. Means its growth will decrease because of this. Because of the presence of T2, which is a toxicant produced by N2. And now this will be a similar equation. You can see here it is T1, okay, and then toxicant, since it is produced by N1, so its growth will depend on N1, and this is a negative term here because there may be depletion in T1 for various reasons, and this is the diffusion term that diffuses this toxicant in the surrounding, okay, by some process, as I say, maybe by wind or rain. And there is another equation, similar equation here. So this was the model, okay, and then after study, what we did is, in case of no diffusion, when there is no diffusion, I mean, it is analyzed like this: no diffusion and effect of diffusion like that. Criteria for local stability, instability, and global stability of the system are obtained. So these are obtained. I hope you will understand those stability concept. If not, you have to look for the definition. In case of allopathy, where one species produces toxicant and affects the other, it is found that the affected species may be driven to extinction. So this is observed, but this is also proved by the model. It is also found that diffusion has a stabilizing effect on the system. Whenever diffusion is present, because we analyze for no diffusion, and when diffusion is present, it has a stabilizing effect on the real system. So here's another model, modeling the interaction of two biological species in a polluted environment. Okay, so their interaction, it could be of different type, as we have seen in the initial basics that I discussed. There we have seen competition. So competition is one type of interaction, so among the species. So here we discuss various types of interaction. So modeling the interaction of two biological species, but in a polluted environment. So effect of pollution is also there on the system. So what we have done in this paper, a mathematical model is proposed to study the effect of environmental pollutant on two interacting biological species. Okay, this is what we have done. The effect of diffusion on the equilibrium state of the system is also studied. Okay, fine. So this is the model. So you can see two species are there, X1 and X2, and environmental pollution T is there. So when I say environmental pollutant, what is exactly T? It is the concentration of pollution. Okay, we need to make it a continuous function. So if we consider concentration of pollutant, it will become continuous. So E1, E2 is a concentration of pollutant in the body of the two spaces. So E1 is the concentration of pollutant present in the body of X1. E2 is concentration of pollutant in the body of X2, like that. And T is a concentration of pollutant in the environment. I hope it is clear. Now here I want to make a point that, while going through the literature, while working on this, we found in one paper from China, Chinese authors, but published in a very good journal. I think Journal of Theoretical Biology, which is a very good journal. So what they did, that assumption, if you recall, in the process of modeling, we mentioned there is a step where you have to apply simplifying assumptions. So what they did is these two, because of make it simpler, what they did, they consider same concentration of pollution inside the two different species. Now imagine, does it happen even if we live in the same place, we share the same location, same resources, everything is same, the environment is same, but still it will be oversimplification if we assume that the concentration of the pollutant inside the two different species are same. Usually it will not happen. Okay, so we realized that, and then what we did, we assumed these are two different pollutant concentration, Q1 and Q2. Okay, so this also came in a very good channel. So then these are initial and boundary conditions that you can see here. Okay, so these are the conclusion. It has been shown that in positive equilibrium of the system, the state of the system or the diffusion is also globally asymptotically stable. So I'm not going to this explanation of global stability, asymptotic stability. Those interested can see, find out from literature. It has further been noted that in system with no diffusion is unstable. Okay, in this case, without diffusion, it will become unstable. Then the state of the system with diffusion can be made stable. Unstable system can be made stable. How? By adjusting the diffusion coefficients appropriately. So this is an interesting result here. Okay, another is a predator-prey interaction model with self and cross diffusion. So this is another kind of interaction where one species will be prey, the other will be predator. So these are well-known classical models by Lotka and Volterra, you must have heard. So that was incorporated, and many other factors are incorporated in this predator-prey. So here self and cross diffusion is used. In this paper, a mathematical model for a predator-prey interaction with self and cross diffusion is proposed and analyzed. The effect of critical wavelength, which can drive a system to instability, is investigated. The effect of time-varying cross diffusivity on the stability of the system is also examined. And this is the mathematical model. So you can see here, of course, it is prey predator. So you can see that which one will be prey here? Which one will be predator? Okay. So the first one, X, okay, its growth depends on X, GX, and Y, PX, you can see. The other part, the last two terms are due to diffusion. Self-imposed diffusion is used. Okay. So the first one, if Y is present, then only its growth will decrease because of this negative term. If Y is present, that means what? X must be the prey. When Y is present, its rate will decrease. Okay. So X is prey, Y is the predator. So what is found? It has been shown that if the prey species tend to diffuse in the direction of lower concentration of predator species, what will happen? They will tend to diffuse. Okay, that is also an observed fact. They will be trying to move away from the predator. So that is verified by the model. Predator species moves along its own concentration gradient, and the equilibrium state A star is locally stable. But this equilibrium becomes unstable if the critical wavelength is very small. Okay. Another model is effects of industrialization and pollution. So industrialization is brought in here. Pollution is already there on the resource biomass. Okay. So what is that? In this paper, mathematical model is proposed to study the depletion of resource biomass. Resource biomass means plants and trees due to industrialization and pollution. So effect of industrialization and pollution is investigated. Numerical simulations are carried out to investigate the dynamics of the system. Okay, so this is the model. B is the that resource biomass that we are talking about. And we want to see the effect of industrialization and environmental pollution on this biomass B. Okay, that represent plants and trees and so on. So you can see BT is the density of the resource biomass. I is industrialization pressure. T is the concentration of pollutant present in the environment. U is the uptake concentration. Concentration of pollutant by the resource biomass. Delta N is the loss rate of pollutant from the environment. So you can see how the model is the logistic equation, the first one. Okay. And industrialization, you can see they're obvious if you see. Okay. And what is found is that in the case of small periodic influx of pollutant, okay, the resource biomass has a periodic behavior if the depletion rate coefficient of pollutant is small. However, if this coefficient increases beyond the threshold value, the resource biomass converges towards its equilibrium. Okay. Then nonlinear models for the survival of two competing species dependent on resource in industrial environment. Okay, so let us see the model. In this paper, a nonlinear mathematical model is proposed and analyzed to study the survival of two competing species dependent on resource in industrial environments with and without diffusion. A conservation model is also proposed and analyzed to study the importance of regeneration of the exploited resource as well as the control of industrialization. Okay, so Okay. There will be two competing species, and they depend on resource, and they are industrial environment. So effect of industry is also there. And two competing species will be there. Resource biomass. So you can see this is the resource biomass. These are the two species which compete for this feed, and with industrialization, industrial pressure. Okay. So you can see that this part is the logistic part, and then since N1 and N2 both depend on biomass B for the survival. So when N1 is present, there will be negative term. When N2 is also present, because they depend on this biomass B, and this is the diffusion term. Okay. Similarly, for the species N1, so how we'll read this? N1 will be the density of the population. Okay, we'll consider density of population. Species, first species N1 cell. Okay, so it will be like this. Now see, since they are competing, N1 and N2 are competing. So what do you expect? If N2 is present, the growth of N1 should be lesser. So there is a negative term here, N1. Okay, and this is diffusion of this. And similarly, the other equation. Here also a negative term because of N1. And this is industrialization. Okay. So of course these two terms are negative, but industry will depend on the biomass. Industry is dependent on B. Okay. So here is a positive term for B. And these are initial and boundary conditions. Okay. So this is how it is developed and analyzed. And what we have found is by analyzing the conservation model, it is shown that if suitable efforts, so there is a conservation model also. I think it is not here, but there is an effort to conserve these biomass. To conserve the resource biomass and to control the undesired level of industrialization, pressure, an appropriate level of resource biomass density can be maintained. So desired biomass density one can maintain, and thus the survival of species may be ensured. And another model is modeling the survival of species dependent on a resource in a polluted environment. Here there is a single species, I think, and it depends on resource biomass, and it is in polluted environment. So in this paper, a mathematical model is proposed to study the survival of species dependent on a resource in a polluted environment. The effect of diffusion of the system is also investigated. It is shown that diffusion plays a general role in stabilizing the system. All right, so this is the model. You can see N is the density of the population, B is the resource biomass, E the environmental pollution, U pollution inside the species, right? So it is in the biomass. Okay. So I think similar to other models, this is developed, and these are initial and boundary conditions. And then modeling the effects of toxicant on uninfected cells, infected cells, and immune response in the presence of virus. So there is another model is the effect of toxicant on uninfected cell, infected cell, and immune response. So I think it is in a species, the effect of toxicant on various types of cells, and there is a presence of virus. So some cells may be uninfected, some may be infected, and what will be the immune response due to the virus? So it is on that aspect. So let us see the model. Two mathematical models are proposed and analyzed. Okay. The first one deals with the interaction of uninfected cells, infected cells, virus, and immune response within humans. Second one deals with the effects of environmental toxicant on the first model. Okay, so initially the toxicant was not there. Then the effect of what will be the effect of environmental toxicant that is also incorporated. So here you can see so uninfected cell, infected cell, okay, virus, and there is the immune response. Okay. So of course, you can make out that X is the density of the uninfected cells, X, and Y is density of the infected cells, V is the density of the virus, Z is the immune response. Okay, and they are developed like this. So you can see effect of virus, and here you can see the immune response also present due to virus. And this is in addition to the other parameters, other variables, environmental pollution is also incorporated. You can see T is the environmental pollution, U is the pollution in the body of the species. Okay, so it is that type of, you have a species, environmental pollution is considered, the fraction of the pollutant that goes inside the species is considered, and now there is virus also, so there will be immune response, and since virus is there, there will be infected cell and uninfected cell as well. So this is the whole model. So what is obtained in each case, sufficient conditions for local stability, global stability of the equilibria are obtained, computer simulations are performed, and the result is biologically interpreted. And it has been seen that the environmental toxicant has detrimental effects on healthy cells, okay, infected cells, as well as on the immune response of the body. So on everything, environmental toxicant has its effect. Okay, and then modeling the effect of pollution on biological species. So it is a socio-ecological problem. So what is done in this paper? A nonlinear spatial model is proposed to study the effect of pollution on biological population. criteria for nonlinear stability, instability for both spatial and non-spatial models are obtained. The various parameters ranges for stable homogeneous solutions are identified. So here is the model. Okay. So you can say P is a population. Q is called precursor also because Q is producing this T. You can see this growth of T depends on Q. Okay, so Q is precursor to this pollutant. Means pollutant is coming from Q. Okay, in other words, Q is the source. Okay, and Q is the fraction of environmental pollution that goes inside the body of the species. All right. So these are various situations, and models have been developed and analyzed. What is it? It is observed that by applying an appropriate effort F, that is not here, I think. I forgot to include. So there is an effort to control the pollution that can be put in place, I think. The population density P can be maintained at a higher equilibrium level. So by putting some effort, you can maintain the population. It is also shown that the equilibrium level of the concentration of precursor pollutant, that Q that I talked about, is precursor to this pollutant. Concentration of pollutant in the environment and in the population decreased due to the effort F. Some effort, that effort model is not here, I forgot to include anyway. That will be another equation related to the control. Okay, some sources that I used for this lecture. Okay, thank you all. I think few minutes are left, so we can have kind of discussion. If you have any question or query, I'll try to respond. Ruata, is there any question?
Yes, sir. There is one question. They are saying, what are the numerical analytical methods used to solve the ODE of the model?
Okay.
That is the question.
Okay. See, these models are not like classroom models. Okay. The students that they learn in the classroom will always consider the standard equations, which can be solved analytically or numerically. Okay, but when you develop a model, it will not be your classroom equation or any it will not be a standard equation, what I mean to say. So usually it results in a nonlinear system. And nonlinear systems are, as you know, difficult to solve. In fact, there's no analytical method. So there are some indirect methods available. What we did is local stability, of course, that we can discuss. Local stability is by applying the Taylor's method, Taylor's theorem. What we do is we linearize the system. Okay? After we linearize, we apply some simple technique to find the local stability. But for global stability, we use something called Lyapunov's method, Lyapunov's indirect method. And the interesting point is when we apply any method to solve any equation, when we find any solution, what is the objective? You know, the objective is to know the behavior of the system, okay, which is governed by this particular model or equation. To know the future behavior. That is, you know, the objective of finding the solution. And Lyapunov's method, without finding the analytical solution, it can give us the behavior of the system. So this method is applied when we have, you know, nonlinear systems. Of course, there may be plenty of other approaches, but in our research, we have been using for local stability, we linearize it using Taylor's method, and then for global stability, we use Lyapunov's technique. Okay, I hope the question is answered. Any other question?
Yeah, only one question was there, sir. And some are asking for the PPT to share. So I think that one can be sorted out later, sir.
Okay, I think we'll share all the PPTs.
Yes, sir.
I think.